Good evening. Welcome to Tuesday Night Live, Life in Focus. We're glad to have you with us this week. Hopefully we can bless you and God can impart something to you that will help your life. We're so excited tonight about what we have to share. But first of all, we're going to play you a song. Let's worship together with this song.
There was a moment when the lights went out, when death had claimed its victory. The King of Love had given up his life, the darkest day in history. There on a cross they made for sinners. For every curse his blood atoned. One final breath and it was finished, but not the end we could have known. For the earth began to shake and the veil was torn. What sacrifice was made as the heavens roared? All hail King Jesus! All hail the Lord of heaven and earth! All hail King Jesus!
what a wonderful song. Jesus Christ, it said, was the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. I like to think about it when he went to the cross as a lamb. Satan thought he had him, but he come off the cross as a lion of the tribe of Judah. I saw a clip one time of a big old guy, and excuse me a minute. A big old guy that this guy come up and hit him just hard as he could, and the guy stood there and said, is that the best you can do? And that's what it was with Jesus on the cross. He went on the cross as a lamb. He came off as a lion of the tribe of Judah, and his message to Satan was, is that the best lick you got? Because it's inefficient. I won. Okay. He brought us life and life more abundantly. Last week we concluded with Moses killing the Egyptian and then trying to break up two of his Hebrew brothers that were fighting, and they discovered that he had killed the Egyptian, and so Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, was trying to find his life, okay, and to kill him, trying to find Moses to kill him. So Moses ran away, and he went to the land of Midian, and he didn't have anybody. He was just a criminal on the loose, running away, and he come up on this well, and there was these young ladies that were herding their dad's sheep, and there was these other shepherds that come up, and they had already drawn the water out of the well for their sheep, and they run them off, these guys did, and was going to water their sheep, and Moses stood up and told them to get away and help the ladies water their sheep, and they took him home with them, so their father was the priest of Midian, okay, and so he embraced Moses, and Moses moved in his house there, and he hired him to watch his sheep. So Moses went from being a prospective king in Egypt to a shepherd in the land of Midian. The priest's name was Jethro. I don't remember his daughter's name, although one of them was named Zipporah, okay? So Moses began to herd the sheep, and this was in the wilderness area, and it was kind of a wild place then. There wasn't a whole lot of people lived there. And so every day Moses got up and went and herded the sheep. And as he did that, he discovered the land, and he did this for 40 years. Now, can you imagine every day getting up, taking your sheep out in the wilderness and wandering around out there? And I'm sure some nights he didn't even get back to where the sheep pen was. He just stayed in the wilderness with the sheep. And so he discovered everything about this wilderness. He went to all the mountains. He found all the places where there was water. He found all the different things that were in there, and he learned that land totally. He knew it totally. So that's the way God does sometimes. When we mess up and have to flee. Now, Moses knew that he was called. He knew what his purpose was to lead the children of Israel, or the Hebrews as they were called then, out of Egypt to the promised land. Okay? So he did that. And he understood what his purpose was, but he tried to do it on his own instead of waiting for God to help him do that for him. Okay? And we understand that because he tried to change God's timing and God's preparation for his life, then he messed things up. And so God took that experience that he had in Egypt as being groomed to be the king of Egypt, and he ended up on the backside of the desert in the wilderness at Jethro's house, a priest of Midian, there, and he became a shepherd, as I said a while ago, and learned all about the wilderness, all about the land. So God was trained him first in the king's way, trained him in the palace. He became and well educated, and as I said last week, he became a general, and it said that he won a lot of battles. He understood military strategy. He understood how to lead people. And so then God took him to the backside of the desert and began to train him at a higher level, not probably according to Moses, but according to God, because it was still God's purpose for Moses to lead out the children of Israel out of Egypt, the Hebrews. Now, God's design was, I'm going to have to give you a little history here. Years before, like 500 years before, there was this guy named Abraham. Now, Abraham lived in a land, and God told him to get up. He told Abraham to get up. Abraham was 75 years old, leave his father's house, go to a place that he was going to show him. Now, we understand that Abraham obeyed God. So Abraham got up and he went to a land that God was going to show him, which was the land of Canaan, which we understood now, if we fast forward ahead, was the promised land that God wanted to take his people to, the Hebrews. So Abraham had a son when he was 100 years old. His wife was 90 years old, and he had a son and named him Isaac, because God said that he was going to raise up a nation out of Abraham. So Isaac was born. Then Isaac had married two ladies. He had two ladies, really. And he had a son named Jacob and a son named Esau. Now God chose Jacob to continue this promise that he had given to Abraham to make a nation out of Abraham's seed, or his children. And God specifically chose one of his sons named Jacob. Now Jacob and Esau got into this deal, and Esau was the firstborn. Now the firstborn back in those days became the heir of your father. And both sons, or however many children you had, got something from your father. But the firstborn received twice as much as everybody else. Now Esau was the firstborn, and he was hunting one day, because he was a hunter. Jacob was a guy that was, he was not outdoorsman, okay? And he was his mother's favorite. And so one day Esau had been out hunting, and he was very hungry. Evidently he didn't kill anything to eat. And so Jacob had prepared a pot of beans. And Esau come in, and he was very hungry, and he said, "Give me something to eat, Jacob." And Jacob said, "Okay, I will, but you got to sell me your birthright." And so Esau said, "Well, I'm going to die anyway because I'm starving to death." So he sold his birthright to Jacob. And Jacob inherited the right of the firstborn's inheritance, which was to get twice as much. And then Esau tried to kill him later. And Jacob had to run for his life, and he ended up in another place. And he married, had two wives, and one of them was Leah, one of them was Rachel. And Rachel was barren, she couldn't have any children, and Leah had a bunch of children. And then Rachel had two children. So altogether, Jacob had 12 children, 12 male children. And I don't know how many, I can't remember how many ladies he had. But he had that. And so Jacob, there became a famine in the land. And Jacob was a very rich man. He had a lot of cattle, a lot of camels. He had all this sheep and everything of that. Now, he was very rich, as I said, and then a famine came, and they moved to Egypt because one of Jacob's sons was sold into slavery and ended up as the prince of Egypt, second in command to Pharaoh. And so he moved his dad and 70, altogether 70 people to Egypt. And then 400 years passed away, and we see where they're at today, that Moses had killed an Egyptian taskmaster and then confronted two of the Hebrew guys that were fighting with each other. So that's where we're at today. And then Moses run away because for his life, and he ended up in Midian, and he ended up in Jethro's house, you might say, or end up working for him in his employment. And then he herded sheep for 40 years. And he learned all about the wilderness, all about the land where he was at. And one day he was taking his sheep out as he did every day. And all of a sudden he saw this bush that was burning. Now this burning bush that he saw was not being consumed. It was on fire, but it wasn't burning up. The leaves were staying green and all that. So he said, I'm going to stop and see what's happening here. That would freak me out too if I saw a tree or a bush burning and the leaves staying green and the fire's still burning, because that's just not a possibility. And so he went over to where the bush was, and a voice spoke to him out of the bush, which would have freaked me out more. I don't know about you. And this voice out of the bush said, take off your shoes, Moses, for you're on holy ground. And Moses, okay, took off his shoes, and this voice began to talk to him and tell him that this voice told Moses, I want you to go back to Egypt, and I want you to tell Pharaoh to let my people go, all the Hebrews. They were 660,000 men at that time, and I don't know how many, so there were probably around 1 million people there that were Hebrews. And Pharaoh said, you must be crazy, Moses, because I'm not going to let these people go. They're my slaves, and they do all this work for me. And Moses said, I want you to let them go. And Pharaoh would not let them go. So God had prepared Moses, as I said before, intellectually, how to lead people. He was very smart. He knew how to lead armies. He knew strategy and all that stuff. And then God taught Moses all about the wilderness, all about that area. Moses learned everything about it. And so then God sent him back to Egypt to lead his people out. Now, God's purpose for these people was to make them a nation. And he said that he was going to take them to what he called the promised land. Now, he said the promised land was flowing with milk and honey. So Moses, the long story short, God sent a lot of plagues, 10 plagues on Egypt, and Pharaoh finally gave up and let the people go. And they went down on the way to the promised land and run into the Red Sea. And then Pharaoh changed his mind, got all of his chariots, all of his armies together, and pursued the Hebrews. So they were trapped on right and left by mountains. They were trapped from the rear by Pharaoh's army, and they were trapped in the front by a sea called the Red Sea. I don't know however many of y'all saw the movie 10 Commandments, but that's kind of, if you could picture in your mind if you saw that movie. So where we're finishing at today is the Hebrews are at the Red Sea. They're all freaked out because they think they're all going to die. They said we should not have left Egypt, but God put a cloud between the Egyptian army and the Hebrews and made it dark on the Egyptian army side and made it light on the Hebrew side, and then he rolled the sea back and the Hebrews started across the sea. All these million people that God had sent Moses back to lead on their journey to the promised land. So what God is doing in your life, He's purposed things for you, but He has to train you and teach you. Just like you went to school, just like if you went to college or learned a trade or went to work somewhere and they taught you how to do the job that they had for you. And so that's the way it was with Moses. So God takes your experiences and He sets you up. Sometimes we think it's a bad thing, but it's always God setting us up to do and preparing us to do what His purpose is for our lives and to make an impact on the world to change our world. That's all I have for today. My time is up. So, thank you for tuning in. We've got to go. It's time to go. See you next Tuesday at 6 o'clock here at the same time, same place. We'll continue this story about your purpose, about what God has got for you. No matter what you've done, no matter what decisions you've made, God takes all those experiences and makes them useful for His purpose in your life. God bless you. Goodbye.